I grew up, I was a child in the middle of the Depression. My early childhood was spent in really tiny hillbilly towns in North Carolina where we were the only Jews they had ever seen. Ever seen. And my father had a very hard time making a living. He had dry goods stores, they were called. And every time we moved, which was every few months, to a new town, I would get beaten up because I was a Jew. And they called me a Christ killer. And I thought they said rice killer. I wondered, what is this? Why? I don't know what that means. And in one town, they beat me up and took my pants off so they could see my tail. So we're talking about really primitive times. And when I was 10, I sold my first story. It was a boys' magazine, and there was a page that sent us a little paragraph about your experiences, and I did, and they printed it and sent me a Mickey Mouse watch. And I said, wow, this is great. You could just talk about your stuff, and they send you Mickey Mouse watches. And really, from that moment, I never thought about doing anything else but being a writer.
What year was that?
Oh, I was 10. I was born in 25, so I can't do math.
Yeah.
I need a calculator.
People will figure that out.
Yeah, 30s, in the 30s somewhere,
Yeah.
or 36. My mother died when I was 11, and my father stuck around for about a month, and then he said, I'll be back in a few days, and he never came back. So I had an uncle who lived like 50 miles away, and he called and discovered that I was alone, and I was taken to his house, and my father was one of 8 kids, all had stores in North Carolina, and they got together, what are we going to do with Arnold? And it was a depression, so they said, I can't take him. I got 2 kids of my own. Nobody could afford to take me except my grandfather. And so I went to live with him. He had a little store in another little town. And this is really bizarre. I've thought about it and can't figure it out to this day. He was married for the second time, and he and his wife never looked at me. They never spoke to me. They put no sheets on the bed. They put no plate out for me to eat. I was non-existent. And I would wait until they were asleep and sneak into the kitchen and scrape the food around the bowl so they wouldn't see any was missing. And I took this for a while, and I said, this is pretty stupid. I don't want to live here. And I thought, where do I want to live? And I said, Radio City in New York. And now this is weird today because it was very common. I hitchhiked to New York. I'm 11. And during the Depression, it was very common. Families were disjointed and kids were moving around, and it wasn't a big deal to see an 11-year-old kid hitchhiking. And I'll skip the whole in between, but I got to New York, got to Radio City. I remember they wouldn't sell me a ticket, so I had to die. Before I left, I cleaned out my grandfather's register, so I had money. So I asked a man, here's my dime, buy me a ticket. He did, and I lived there. I found a place to hide at night so the watchman wouldn't see me. I would sneak backstage and look at the scenery. It was magic. It was the best thing I could imagine. It was better than Disneyland. And I would break into the candy machines and eat the candy and drink water from the fountain and see the same show over and over, the same movie, and I got pretty bored with that after a while. So I went out. And this is kind of Depression era stuff. But I might well. I remember I had to steal food. I would go into little mom and pop shops and steal an apple or some cupcakes, whatever I could, and walk out. And one day, the owner, the man, caught me and he started screaming at me and shaking me. And his wife came over and told him to stop. And instead of the one apple, she gave me 2 apples and sent me on my way. It was an amazing time. And another time, I remember I saw a line all the way around the block, and I followed, where is this line going to? And it was a bread line. They were giving food out. And I was too hungry and too tired to get all the way in the line, so I just sat down on the curb with my head in my hands and really disgusted. And apparently a middle-aged man, I remember this so well, near the front of the line, when he got his food, he came and sat on the curb beside me. We did not say a word, and he gave me half of his food. And we ate the food, didn't say a word. We got up and walked away in opposite directions. Unbelievable. I remember it so vividly. And then by chance, I was walking the streets of New York and saw the New York Public Library. And I said, wow, a library. I want to go to the library. I want to live there. So I moved into the library. And during the day, I would just read all kinds of books, but I didn't know what the words meant. And at night, there's I think, the 7 or 8 stories below the ground level. And I would find a different one each night and hide in the stacks and sleep there. In the morning, I would get up and go and wash myself and steal some food and come back and read. And it occurred to me, if I want to be a writer, I better find out what the words mean. So I hitchhiked back to North Carolina to my grandfather's house, who did not know I was gone. And I stayed there until I finished high school, which in those days in North Carolina, there was only 11 grades, and I think like 8 months a year. You learn nothing. The requirements to be a teacher, we needed a high school education, but the high schools were like my high school, where they taught nothing because they knew nothing. But I got a scholarship to the University of North Carolina. I went there. I took 3 or 4 English classes, a journalism class, because I knew wanted to be a writer. I didn't need a degree. Got to the English class, didn't know a word they were talking about, never heard of the books they were talking, had no clue what was going on. So I stopped the classes and started writing little human interest stories for the local newspaper to pay my expenses. People in town, about monuments, how they came about, just stuff like that.
Would you go out and talk? Were you acting as a reporter? Would you go out and talk to people, and interview them, and get it all down, and then go?
It was absolute reportage. I didn't know what it was about, but I'd talk to them and found something interesting. And I knew the format from the journalism class, and I wrote, it was like, I don't know how many words, and they sold them. This was so easy. Everything in my life has been so easy,
right,
and so lucky. It amazes me. I just feel guilty because it was so easy.
But what you were developing at that time, I guess, for your career, were skills as a journalist.
Absolutely.
And how to tell a story.
Absolutely, yeah. So I got a list from the journalism department of all the papers in North Carolina. I wrote my little stories and mimeographed them and sent them out. I don't remember how many, like several hundred. And I learned, I saw the format for release at such and such a date, and I didn't know, at usual rates. And to my surprise, like out of several hundred, however many, like 10, 20, 30 would print it, and I'm getting money at like $10 a piece. I was making $300 or $400 a week during the Depression. I think the teachers weren't making half that much. So I bought a car. I went to Havana, pre-Castro Havana. Great life. Since you want to know what contributed to my writing, got off the plane in Havana. Taxi driver, take me to the best hotel. I had pockets full of cash. On the way, he said, do you want to see an exhibition? I thought, an art exhibition? Sure. He took me to a whorehouse. And out comes like 6 or 8 women and 2 or 3 guys. And I'm now 16. This was better than Radio City. It was, and I said, who do you want? I want them all. And I don't know, I spent weeks there and got with my basic education was there. The war had started when I was 16, and I couldn't wait to get in it. I didn't know about the Holocaust. I didn't know about Pearl. I didn't know about anything. It was a war, and it was exciting, and it was an adventure, and I wanted to be a Marine because they had the nicest uniform. But I was too short to be a Marine. And so I didn't want to be in the Army because I saw the movies. They were in the dirt, and the people were shooting at them. So I joined the Navy because it's clean, and you could take a shower, and nobody is shooting at you. And then I got to boot camp, and they wake you up at dawn. It's dark, it's cold, and you're running and jumping. And I said, oh my God, what did I do? I got to get out of this. And I had learned to type, not on the typewriter, but there was a print, a layout of the keys with diagrams of where to move each finger. So it occurred to me there's got to be an office here. I found the office, and I said, I was told to report as a typist. I don't know how we won the war. It's so stupid. I said, over there. And then I went to the barracks and said, I was told I'm a typist. Okay, nobody cared. And then I realized that this is the office where requisitions came in, 3 people to gunnery school, 4 people to cooking school, and I waited till one came up that I liked, which was photography school. My name on the top, and I'm in photography school. Part of it was aerial photography. And I remember the first time going in a plane, you had to lock yourself in, strap yourself in, because the pilot would pick a target, and he'd turn the plane on its side, and I had to lean out with this really heavy camera and take a picture. You clicked it like that, you took the picture. And we did it, and I was scared because I was scared of heights anyway. What the hell am I doing here? And finally we did it. It flipped over, and I did the picture, and I sat down relieved, and I realized I'd forgot to fasten my seat belt.
Wow.
Very lucky. I covered from the air Iwo Jima, Okinawa, the first planes in Japan passing Mount Fuji. It never occurred to me that I could get hurt. As a matter of fact, I was assigned to a fighter squadron, which means as a pilot. There's no room for me. Mm-hmm. And I figured out a way. Behind the pilot, there was a glass canopy that pulled back where the radio equipment is. And I figured out I could squiggle in. I was so little, weighed about 90 pounds. I was a skinny little kid. I could squeeze in there and go. And I went to the commander and I said, I can squeeze in and take the pictures. He says, you can get hurt up there. What, are you crazy? And I said, but that's my job, sir. And he says, you don't have a job. This is a fighter squad. You're a fucking photographer. We don't need you. And then I started to cry. I'm in the Navy, on a carrier, in a war, and I'm crying like a little kid that I was. And I don't know why, but for some reason he said, "Oh," I said, "You can't do this to me. You can't let me get this close and not get in it." And for some reason he said, "Okay." But I couldn't wear a parachute because the parachute wouldn't fit. So I'm in this thing, and they are shooting at us, but I didn't think they would hit us, and they didn't. And I'm taking these pictures and coming back, and I made a business out of it. I took pictures of all the pilots in exchange for food. They were officers, they had steaks and ice cream, and I ate well, and I lived well, and I lived in the photo lab, and it was a picnic for me. It was absolutely a picnic. So after the war, I went to New York to that's where people went to become novelists, to write a novel.
So you'd written one on the carrier.
Yeah, but I didn't even bother sending that out. I knew that was. I still have it in a box somewhere, and I keep saying I really want to read it, but I haven't read it in 50 years, so I may never read it. But it occurred to me, and looked through the books in the library, that a novel is like 300 or 400 pages. A play is 120 pages. I think I'll write plays. It was survival skills.
Yeah.
Absolute survival.
Yeah.
I'm in a situation, I don't like it. I have the power to fix it. I can't rely on anybody else. But this is the way to go. Robert Anderson, who later wrote great plays, Tea and Sympathy, wonderful movies, The Nun Story, Sand Pebble. He was teaching a course in playwriting. He had just gotten out of the Navy or Army, whatever he was, and I wrote a play. His wife was an executive at the Theater Guild, which was the most prestigious theater producing organization in the world. And he became so excited about my play that, first of all, I mean, I was living in, this is such a wonderful man, I can't say that, but living in a cold water flat in the Lower East Side. It's now called the Village East, so then it was the Lower East Side. 5 flights, cold water, the bathtub on legs in the kitchen with the toilet, and the floor slanted, and I didn't have any. One night I was weak because I hadn't eaten, and I didn't say anything, but I just quietly left. And Bob obviously figured it out, because an hour or two later, when class, I was back in my apartment. He had climbed up 5 flights of stairs, knocked on the door. He had 2 huge bags of groceries. And then when I went to the mailbox in the morning, he had left an envelope in the mailbox with several $100 bills in it. Now, how do you find somebody like that? It's amazing. But through his wife at the Theater Guild, I started writing radio. The Theater Guild on the Air, and they did radio plays of big hit movies. I remember I wrote the radio play for Lost Weekend, for example, and they had big stars, and that was fascinating.
Was that Lux Radio Theater?
No, it was called Theater Guild on the Air.
Theater Guild on the Air. Wow.
And but
well, tell us again what you wrote.
I wrote a
radio version
play
of
Lost Weekend, and I don't remember many of them, but they were hit movies, and then they did a radio version. So I had to learn that you do that by what you hear. And I invented drips of water and telling the story by what you hear and can't see. And it was great training, because like you're going on the air live, and we need 1 minute and 20 seconds. and I got to write a minute or cut a minute into two. Brilliant training.
This is absolutely fascinating, and this is this is a great area for us to mine. First of all, Robert Anderson was this acclaimed guy. Where was he teaching this class that
It
you
was the American Theater Wing, and I went under the GI Bill, and also I'm glad you stopped, because during this time there was the Dramatists Guild had an organization called the New Dramatists, and there were 30 of us that they picked. Paddy was one of them. Bob Anderson was one of them. Bill Inge. Every one of the 30 became very, very successful writers. Steve Sondheim was one. And every week we'd meet and just talk about craft. We saw a picture of Rodgers and Hammerstein. Hammerstein came to talk to us about writing a book for a musical, but technical stuff. Things like, those days you took a play on the road, and it was New Haven, Boston, Wilmington, Philadelphia, all that. And one of them, I've forgotten who said, when you're on the road, take the biggest laugh that you get, no matter where it occurs in the play, and put it at the end of the second act. It was that kind of stuff. And how to write a funny line, where to put the joke line at the end of the sentence. It was that kind of meticulous craft stuff. And so out of radio, then I got into live television, which was the best training, because every week it was like writing a one-act play, and it's being acted not for 50 people, but for 50 million people. It's going out live, and it's the same problem. Holy Christ, we got 2 minutes short. You got to fill in 2 minutes, or you got to cut 5. It was just crazy. And the actors would have to run. You're laughing in this scene over here, and you have to run. I had to write it to give them enough time to get to that scene, that they're crying. It's just brilliant.
What were the names of some of the live theater shows that you did?
The one you mentioned, U.S. Steel Hour, that was with Paul Newman, called Bang the Drum Slowly. I remember it because it was done later on, recently on PBS. The Schlitz Playhouse 90, all of them. I don't know. Danger,
Studio One,
Craft. All those Craft, yes. Yeah. And the director, Sidney Lumet, George Roy Hill, John Frankenheimer, Arthur Penn, the whole next generation of filmmakers, directors, writers, and actors came out of that live TV. You did a show a week. You had no time to screw around. It was bang, bang, bang. Brilliant craft teaching. Like Sidney Lumet was the best, because when he became a film director, he was a good friend, so we talked about it a lot. He didn't trust the studios to cut it. He just shot what he knew, because he knew how to do it, because he was doing it on live TV. I don't need 4 angles. I'm going to use 1 angle, and I know what my next cut is. And most of them, Arthur Penn, I worked with them, every week, all of them. And we worked well together. It was the best, most thrilling, most productive time in the world. But they had to go on because live TV became film TV, and who wanted to do that? And anyway, you've got a bigger scope, a bigger budget. Obviously, it's the next logical step. But all of their training, they got the best possible training in the world. But another good fortune thing that happened there, all through Bob and his wife Phyllis, she got me into the Actors Studio as an observer. Now, this was at the time, the very first group. It was Brando, Monty Clift, Julie Harris, even everybody who became whoever they were started there in the first group at the Actors Studio. And I worked there. I worked as I wrote stuff and directed stuff, and it was, I learned everything. But Lee Strasberg was running it. And I wrote my first play that the Theater Guild was going to produce. And I loved Lee. I thought he was God. And I said, I want him to direct. They said, please, he's not a good director. He will ruin the play. I said, if he doesn't do it, I don't want it done. They said, okay. And we tried it out at the Westport. The Theater Guild owned the Westport Country Play. That's where they tried it out first. And Lee directed it. It was rather pretentiously, the name of it was My Fiddle Has Three Strings. And he's directing it. And opening night, it went on forever. Forever. The Actors Studio, Lee was between hello and how are you. There was 5 minutes of the actors doing a sense memory and working on the heat and a private moment. And the audience was walking out in droves. It was a catastrophe. And another unforgettable moment is in the audience was Noel Coward and his companion, and I rushed out when he was kind enough to wait until the end of the first act before he left. And I rushed up to hear what he was saying to his companion. And he said, I was smoking, actually, I think it should have been called My Fiddle Has Two Strings, oi and vey.
From Noel Coward.
Noel Coward, oi and vey. The follow-up to that story is, I'm there, and I started to laugh, and they look at me, and I said, I wrote it. And he said, oh dear, I guess I put my foot in it, whatever it is. If you ever get to Jamaica, look me up. Okay, well, who's going to get to Jamaica? But like years later, after I had a hit play, I did go to Jamaica. I forgot about him completely. I went there to write, and there was a message from Noel Coward saying, I'll have a car pick you up at 7:30 for dinner. He remembered it all those years because he got caught saying it, and I laughed about it. And we had a marvelous evening. I don't remember what we said, but how everything has fit together in my life so amazingly.
There are these two things going on, I guess. You're writing plays and working with the Theater Guild and with Actors Studio, and you're sort of involved in that universe. And then you're also doing live TV. So tell us how did live TV, tell us what happens from the beginning of one of your live TV ideas.
Here's how the transition. I did a live TV of, God, I had pretentious titles. Jesus, I am embarrassed. My Heart's a Forgotten Hotel, okay?
Now, you came up with this idea?
Yeah, this was an original.
And then you go to them and pitch it? I mean, in those days, how did that work?
In those days, was Fred Coe was the producer, and he was and he loved everybody. And I said, I've got a thing I want to do. He said, okay. You didn't even have to tell him what it was. Have it in by Thursday. that was the way it worked. And half the time I didn't know what it was. But this one, Arthur Penn directed it. And it was a big, big hit. It was a 90-minute show. And I got a call a day or two later from Garson Kanin. He had just written and directed Born Yesterday, which was a big hit with Paul Douglas and Judy Holliday.
He said, film?
No, it was
this is the play.
Broadway play. He and his wife, Ruth Gordon, had written all or most of the Spencer Tracy, Katharine Hepburn movies. He was really a giant. And he said, have you thought about making a play? I said, absolutely. I've got it already. And we met, and he that was my next play, which was on Broadway, and it was a hit. But again, a kind of wonderful man. I just met wonderful people. Absolutely lucky. Maybe I don't know if they were all wonderful then, or I just happened to meet the wonderful one. We were out of town, and I wrote it. The television play was about a father and a son, oddly enough, and the father is going to abandon the son. Okay, where did that come from? And in the television show, he does. He leaves, and that's the way we started to play. But it was funny, and we opened in Philadelphia, and the audience were laughing. It was funny. First of all, the cast, Kanan cast Paul Douglas as the father, and these names will not be familiar, but David Burns was an old vaudeville comedian, funny, Thelma Ritter. Everybody was funny, and the audience was having the best time of their life. And then it ends on a tragedy. They go, what the hell is this? And but it was obvious what had to be done. I have to fix the ending. But Kanan said, it's your call. It's your play. You bring it in just the way it is. If you want to fix it, it's up to you. And I thought about it. I said, well, if I could bring it in, it's a flop, what good is that doing for anybody? I'll fix it. I know how to fix it. I've been doing that on live TV. And you sit down, and overnight I fixed it. And it became a big hit comedy, which then was made into a film by Frank Capra with Frank Sinatra, Edward G. Robinson, and Eleanor Parker. Hit movie
Called
A Hole in the Head. It opened as A Hole in the Head because I could not come up with a title because all my titles were too pretentious. So A Hole in the Head in Yiddish, it's a Yiddish expression. I need you like a hole in the head, a Lochenkopf in Yiddish. So let's call it A Hole in the Head. Okay, I don't care what you call it. I don't like the title still. It's a dumb title, but it's better than The Heart's Forgotten Hotel. Anyway, we were doing that play that was successful, that through Kanan again, he got, first of all, let me go back to, I had a theater agent that Phyllis Anderson got me. She was Tennessee Williams' agent, Audrey Wood, the best agent in town. And she represented me in theater. And Kanan called his agent Abe Lasvogel, who was the head of William Morris, and he became like my father. And he put everything together for me, like Love with a Proper Stranger. I wrote it, it was a spec script. In those days, abortion was illegal. And the premise of the story is this innocent girl has a one-night stand. She's a virgin with this musician. She gets pregnant, and she and this guy fall in love while looking for an abortionist. That's the story. Who the hell is going to make that story in 1950s or whatever it was? But Abe Lasvogel put it together. He got Natalie Wood, and she was living with Warren Beatty at the time, and he turned it down. So he said, I got this new kid, Steve McQueen. I'll put him in it. Anyway, he put the whole thing together. It was just, and he gave me advice. He was like my father.
Well, he's a legend. He's probably the most legendary agent in the history of the movie business.
I had them all.
Yeah.
I had Swifty Lazar.
Yeah.
I had Sue Mengers.
Wow.
I had all of the legendary agents in the business. In those days, everybody respected everybody. Before getting into the agent, just like the writer, the director, and the actors were a collaboration. I remember with Sinatra, out of respect for Capra, he said, "Can I say this line this way instead of that way?" Because he's notorious for ad-libbing. And Capra says, "I'll ask Arnold." That's the way it worked. Because they didn't respect me, they respected the writer. He has a function. He's an equal partner in this thing. But back to the agents. In my case, as I said, their first concern was looking after me. But overall, it was putting the package together. And they made the movies. I mean, they put the producers together. They packaged the whole thing. And that's the way it worked. And if this person wasn't available, you get that person. It was an offshoot. It was when the movie business changed from complete studio run thing to packaging. Agents took over. Agents really ran the business at that time. Mm-hmm. And I think Lou Wasserman is credited with starting all that. But what was the quote?
Well, I was just talking about how your relationship was with, you know, these are all they're all legendary agents, you know, Sue Mengers and
yeah, Swifty, of course, was totally different. He didn't give a damn about me. He didn't give a damn about anybody. I remember he didn't even represent half the people he'd got jobs for. He represented anybody he wanted to. If he thought he could sell you, he would sell you. At the funeral of Natalie Wood, whom I adored, I loved Natalie. I was in love with Natalie. I'm sitting next to Swifty, and he can't wait for the funeral to be over. And the minute we turn around, he says, "I got a deal for you."
Wow.
I said, "Swifty later, okay?" That's what Swifty was. He was altogether different than Abe. And Sue was her own way crazy. I love her. But back to Fosse and Paddy Chayefsky.
Yeah.
Sue was Fosse's agent, and he had done a big flop, Sweet Charity. And you couldn't get her on the phone, or when she did, she was totally destructive, and we would laugh about it. It was, "What did Sue say today?" And she told Fosse, "I can't even get you a job on episodic TV. Nobody wants you." To Bob Fosse.
Wow.
So that's agents, but they all had their own little personality.
How did your friendship with Paddy Chayefsky start, and tell us a little bit about that?
It started in this new dramatist committee. He was one of the 30 new dramatists. And we just had a good rapport, and we started hanging out together, and his wife, and then we moved into the same building, and it just became a good, close friendship. And at that time, when we were writing stuff, you needed a sounding board. So he would come to my office, I'd go to his. "I'm stuck here. I've got this, and this is the situation." And we bounce ideas off each other. This is kind of an interesting story. During this live TV thing, he said to Fred Coe, "I want to do this thing." And Fred said, "Okay, Thursdays or whatever." And then he said, "I got to have it ready for Thursday. I don't know what the hell to write about." And we were talking about, maybe I'll write about, he was a little fat guy. I'll write a little fat guy and a girl. And he says, and he's that Marty Ritt, who became the director, was an actor at the time at the Actors Studio. And so we started calling the character Marty because it was for Marty Ritt. And Marty does this, and then Marty does that. And then one evening we worked out the whole plot. And then that became Marty the TV show, and Marty the movie, and Marty the Academy Award winner. The basic elements that I got from Bob Anderson, how to write a play, serve movies, everything. It's so simple. Who wants what? What stands in his way? What does he do to get it? What does that lead to? What does that lead to? What are the obstacles? And either he gets it or he doesn't. That's it. That's all you need to know. Who wants what? What does he do to get it? And the same holds true with what you were talking about. Well, if he's got this obstacle, how the hell does he get out of it? Well, maybe he does this. Well, maybe he does this. Maybe, and then if you've got a sounding board, it's easier. At that time, I don't do that anymore, because right now, when I'm writing, I have no idea what's going to happen, ever. It just starts, and I'm fascinated by where it goes. So it's a whole different process. Back then, you had to have it ready on Thursday, so it's a different story.
Where do you find those ideas about what the want is for a character? How do you figure out who the character is, and how do you figure out? I mean, are these inspirations that hit you in the middle of the night, or
Well,
what happens?
Each one is different. Each one is different. I'm trying to remember what was the beginning of Love with a Proper Stranger. It evolved. I'm sorry, I don't remember. Mm-hmm. I remember suddenly finding myself in this situation where she's pregnant and she's not married, and we need to. It was about finding. I thought it was terrible that abortion was illegal, and that's still going on right now. Mm-hmm. And I said, I think that's the route. I want to write how horrible it is to have an illegal abortion. That was the beginning of it. And then I had to find that somehow I found this girl and this guy and the musician and put it all together. But it started with the idea of an idea that I wanted to protest. And that was the beginning of that one.
And is that something you find yourself often doing? Is having strong feelings about social issues and political issues and wanting to find a way of expressing those?
Not always. Sometimes. Sometimes I'm intrigued by quirky psychological motivations. Most of the things I've done have been adaptations, because I have a garage full of scripts that I wrote, spec scripts, that nobody will ever do or want to do. But that they started because of something I really wanted to say or whatever. But an adaptation, it's there, it's going to get made, it's an assignment. There are bills to pay and kids to deal with, and that's why most of my stuff is adaptations.
You know, you did an adaptation of a Philip Roth novel, and Goodbye Columbus. I think that might have been the first. Was that the first Roth novel that was made into a movie?
It was his first novel.
First novel.
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell us about somebody says to you, Arnold, we want you to do this.
This is a really, really interesting story. I had now been nominated, got an Oscar nomination for Love with a Proper Stranger. And Stanley Jaffe, who was 28 years old, comes to me and says, I've got this new book by a new writer. I can't pay you any money, but my father is the head of Columbia Pictures, and I guarantee you we'll get it made. And I said, I like it. And incidentally, I met Philip Roth, and he took me where it all happened. This is where I lived, and this is where I met her, and here's the swimming pool. It was a great few days. And I wrote the script, and Sidney loved it, and he gave it to his father, head of Columbia. And his father said, are you crazy? This is about Jews. We can't make a movie about Jews. And so what are we going to do now? So it's dead. And I had a meeting at Paramount with Peter Bart, who was, Bob Evans was the head of the studio, and Peter Bart really functioned as the brain. He made all the decisions. And we're talking about whatever he called me in about, and he says, do you have anything you want to do? And I said, yeah, I happen to have this script that I've already written. He said, well, let me see it. And 2 days later, or 5 days later, whatever it was a deal. And out of that, Stanley became the head of Paramount Pictures.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing?
That's a great story.
Also, let me go on with this because this is so crazy. Bob Evans, we had to cast unknowns. We had no budget. It was like $1 million or under. And Dick Benjamin was in it. We needed a girl. And best we read everybody. And Ally McGraw got it because she was a stylist. She had never acted before. And Bob Evans was dead set against her. Absolutely not, but we have nobody else. Of course, he wound up marrying her twice. And the second time, I don't know, I'm talking as if nobody will ever see this.
Yeah, that's a good way to do it.
Years later, after she had married Steve McQueen, had left Evans, Steve McQueen, that I gave one of his best, Ally, all come together. I get a call from Bob Evans. Let me backtrack, another coincidence. I lived in New York in the same building that Bob Evans lived in when he was in the pants business. And he sees me in the elevator and he says, let's form a company together. And I'm thinking, why would I want to form a company with you? You're in the pants business. Like 4 months later, he was the head of Paramount Pictures.
That's great.
Anyway, back to the story. He says, calls me, I want to get back together with Ally. It worked so well the first time. Write a story for Ally, and we'll get back together. And he loved tennis, so he says, let's make it about tennis. So this was one of the worst movies ever made in the history of the world. We get on location in Mexico with a terrible little weasel of a director. It was just terrible.
Who was that?
What the hell was his name? Lawrence Harvey? Is that a name?
Oh, yeah. That's
weasel.
that's
awful man.
Yeah.
But worse than that, Evans had like 6 writers. None of us knew anybody else was writing the script. So how could you possibly put it together? It was just, none of it made any sense at all. And he didn't get back together with Ally. So it was a complete waste of everything.
Well, go back now for a second to this question.
Yeah.
Guy hands you a novel, says, here's a new novel by this guy, Philip Roth.
Right.
And you read it and you say, I like it, I'd be happy to write it. So tell us a little bit about how you get from having this novel, reading this novel to writing a screenplay based on it.
Okay, well, remember I said in writing radio, that's all about hearing stuff. And at this time, there were no film schools. So I had to learn when I came time to write a movie, I looked at movies and realized it's not about what you hear, it's about what you see. So I want to go back to that in the first thing, but well, it can fit in here in terms of take whatever the writer is describing and take the scene that he's describing and try as much as possible to make it a silent movie. If there is no, to use visual metaphors as wherever possible. And that's kind of what it's that simple, really. It's all very simple. There are certain scenes that are good, and some of them, especially with Roth, the dialogue is great. And that's a good scene just the way it is. But with some of the other things, you just have to reinvent it. A beautiful let me go back to Goodbye Columbus again. Working with Larry Pierce, the director.
Mm-hmm.
And in the book, there was a letter, very touching letter, that the father writes to his daughter. It's all about, she has an affair, he trusts her, and it's the movie, and she's a wealthy Jewish family, and he's a poor Jewish family, and it's that mixture. And Larry says, I want to put this letter in. How can I put the letter in, Larry? It's a letter. I don't. So in rehearsal, we're rehearsing a scene. I said, suddenly it hit me. Oh my God, I know exactly where it's going to go. And I went in the corner and I wrote it, took the letter, made dialogue out of it, and gave it to them in that scene that we were doing. I realized this is a place where she is already having an affair and feels guilty about it, and feels guilty about the guy, and the father is telling her how much he loves her, and I trust you, and I know you would never do anything to disgrace me. So that's how being in rehearsal works. But it brings up the point about what I liked about breaking new ground, like the abortion was illegal, and I wanted to do something. In this, it was a big deal made about the fact that the movie hinged on her using a diaphragm. And she left it so that her parents could see it. And he said, you did it deliberately to break it up, but you couldn't say the word diaphragm. And I said, why the hell not? And that was a big groundbreaking thing, just the fact we said the word diagram. Which my first movie, and I realize as we're talking now, that it has been a kind of goal of mine. Whenever you can't do something, that's what I want to do. Like my first movie ever was Wild as the Wind. This came about when my play was running, and Abe says, Hal Wallace, one of the best producers who ever lived, he had made a movie with Anna Magnani, fantastic Italian woman, Rose Tattoo with Marlon Brando. And he had her under contract for another movie, and he was looking for a story. But she only wanted to do one story because she, I think I may get the name wrong, I think she was having an affair with Rossellini, and she wanted to do this picture called Furia with him. And he now got tired of her and made Furia with somebody else. So she only wanted to do Furia to get back at him, and so I can do it better. And you should have used me. So Furia was a hopeless movie. You couldn't make it. It was the oldest plot in the world. And Abe said, can you come up with something? And I came up with something and told it to Hal, and he said, great, and let's do it. Because this is way off the tangent, but it goes back to live TV training. I somehow placed it in Nevada in a sheep ranch. And during part of a major scene took place when the little sheep were being born. I hadn't finished the script, but the sheep are going to be born. So we got to start shooting. They're not going to wait till I get to see. So we go on location at Carson City, and the live training came in. At night, I wrote the scenes that we're going to shoot the next day, based on what the Lambs did, based on at the airport, I remember there was a scale. You put in a penny or a nickel, whatever it is, and they give you a fortune. I said, okay, I can use that. She gets off the plane from Italy to this strange place, Nevada. She knows nothing. To marry a man she doesn't even know, the mail order bride. and she gets on the scale, and it's an unfavorable fortune. And put that in. At the end of each day, we'd have the cast and the director, we'd have dinner together, and somebody wanted to have a toast, didn't drink wine, and he wanted to have a toast to Magnani with water. She knocked the glass out of his hand. It's bad luck. Poof, poof. I put that in the movie.
Wow.
Whatever happened, I wrote it in the movie that night. And I loved it. I loved it. It was so exciting.
Well, that's like your experience, I would assume, in doing in theater also, when you're out of town and you're trying to fix
Absolutely.
something all the time, and every night you...
Absolutely. And that's what's exciting. It's really wonderful. I don't think they make movies that way anymore. I don't know what they do now.
They can't. They cost so much money, and there's so
Yeah,
much involved in the
exactly.
production.
It is. You can't improvise a car crash overnight. You know?
Well, where did this idea come? Wild as the Wind, about this
Well, the
immigrant?
movie Fury, it was an Italian movie.
So
Fury.
you started. You did start.
I started
with
with the premise. It was about mine. It was a mail order bride kind of thing. He's alone, and I took the basic plot elements, but what I started to say about that one is, at that time, the production code, if a woman commits adultery, she had to die at the end. Had to die, a car accident, whatever. She had to be punished. In my movie, not only did she not die, but the husband she cheated on apologizes to her, which was, again, a big fight with the censors. And I lost my temper, and Hal said, calm down, I'll take care of it. And he took care of it. It was just idiotic. I've never been a big political crusader or anything like that. I've got something I want to say, and I'm going to say it. I don't never have anything to say, ever. I just want to Noel Coward said, I have a talent to amuse. Yeah. That's good enough for me.
If I'm quoting you correctly, the great thing about adaptations is that you can make money at them.
No, it's not that you can make money out of them, but it's that they'll get made.
Yeah.
It's an assignment.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not wasting your time. It wasn't so much I'll make the money. It's just I'm not wasting my time.
Yeah.
I know that this will actually be made because they've bought the book or the play or the musical, and they want to make it. And too many times, this garage full of scripts that I wanted to write, nobody wanted to make it for one reason or another.
And when you would go into one of these adaptations, say Chorus Line, which was a giant hit as a play, as a musical, are there things that you have in mind as soon as the project starts as to how you're going to deal with all that?
Well, Chorus Line is a completely different story. It had been around for 10 years and nobody could lick it. And Fuhrer and Martin, Cy Fuhrer and Ernie Martin, who produced on Broadway Guys and Dolls and giants, they asked me if I wanted to do a Chorus Line, and I wrote a script. Movie. It wasn't the play. I made a movie out of it, and
you mean you didn't
I
do it on
opened
a
it
theater? You went out and
I opened it. I
locations.
told each of the stories, and brought it back. Interwove. It was a very complicated screenplay, and they got Richard Attenborough to direct it, and we met and talked and worked for months on the script, my script. And then when it comes to shoot it, I don't know what happened. He didn't shoot the script. He shot the play.
Really?
He just went right back to the play. And the producer, Norman Lear, and I'm going to call him a prick because he is, Alan Horn, with Embassy Pictures. I'm saying this because at the preview in San Diego, this is LA, it's not a big thing. He's going down the list of who's going to go to the preview. Schulman, who's Schulman? Oh, the writer. We don't need him. And Attenborough said, of course we did. He's the writer. So that annoyed me. So I went to the preview. I'm sorry I did, because I thought it was terrible. But this is really weird stuff. But the cards came back. You know, you get the preview card.
Yeah.
Everybody loved it. But Jerry Perenchio, who was putting up the money, and Norman Lear, and Fuhrer and Martin, and I, we hated it. But the card said it was good. This is the guy who was doing the focus group. This is the first time I've ever seen the people who made the film angry because they liked it. Anyway, so we kept saying, this doesn't make sense, so you got to put this in. So, okay, I'm going to recut it and come to Nice, and I'll show you the recut. When we went to Nice, he didn't change it. And then went on, got to come to London. We went to London. He didn't change it. So I don't think it was a successful movie. I mean, I didn't like it, the movie. The play was brilliant.
Yeah.
The stuff from the play was good because it was good stuff.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a movie.
It wasn't a movie. Tell us about Funny Lady.
Funny Lady was a total disaster. Complete disaster. Barbara Streisand, that's all I have to say. She said, said, look, this is a funny joke, but he's got it. I want it. Wow. And I said, it won't work if you've got it. It only works because I don't care. We'll make it work. So I put up with this for a while, and then I said, no, I quit. I can't do this anymore. And they called another writer in. And I don't think it worked as a movie, but I just couldn't work with her in that way. I loved Herb Ross, the director.
You did.
And Ray Stark was a great friend of mine. He was probably the most reptilian, despised guy in the business, but we went skiing together. We had a good time together. As a matter of fact, we were skiing one day, and he was very, very gloomy. I said, what the hell is wrong with you, Ray? He said, we just shot a movie the way we were, and we can't cut it. It doesn't work. That the first half of the movie is one set of characters. The last half, there was a completely new set of characters. And I said, okay, when we go back, I'll take a look at it. Sidney Pollack directed. It was a brilliant script by Arthur Lawrence. And I figured out we needed a few connecting scenes to introduce the other guy. And there was wonderful stuff that they shot, really funny stuff, a funny party scene with somebody I remember, dressed like Groucho Marx. They couldn't figure it in, and I worked it all out and worked it together. And I didn't want any credit because Lawrence did a brilliant job, and I just patched it up. And Ray Stark came to me and he said, how much? Well, what can I pay? I said, I don't want anything. I did it because you're my friend. And he was, oh my God, I'll never forget this. I said, wonderful. And the very next picture I did with him, I don't remember what it was, or I'm making up these figures. It was like this. He says, I know I owe you $100,000 save, but I'm only going to pay you 50 because if you sue me, it'll cost you 100,000. This way, we're both making 50. This is so completely nuts. He will never forgive me. He'll do anything for me. I saved his movie.
Yeah.
So that's another part of
Hollywood.
Business.
What about directors? You've worked with Coppola and Richard Attenborough, Herbert Ross, Larry Pierce, Bill Friedkin, Bob Mulligan, and countless others. What do you have to tell us? You've had amazing experience about the relationship between writers and directors.
Well, I mentioned with Capra and Cukor, they were old school studio directors. They didn't care about the acting because they hired Cukor. If you've got Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn and Jimmy Stewart, you don't have to tell them how to act. Mm-hmm. It was all about with him. Before we started working, I went on the set where he was shooting a picture with Claire Bloom, the Chapman Report. And he says to her, "No, no, darling, cut. In a close-up, you can't blink your eyes because your eyelashes are 40 feet long."
Yeah.
That's the way he directed.
Yeah.
Long shot, a medium shot, every scene. His close-up, her close-up, over the shoulder, over the standard, and that was the way it is. And then you put together in the editing room. And Capra was the same way, because that's what you did in the studio, as opposed to Sidney Lumet, who cut it in the camera.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't have that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And Coppola was brilliant, and we rehearsed everything, and he had a little handheld camera, and he put it all on film, and he has this silver bullet. It's a trailer that's got all the equipment in it, and he works in the trailer, and completely different experience with Coppola, which was interesting because George Lucas was the producer. It was the movie was Tucker, about the car, and both of them, each of them had a Tucker car, and we rode in the car and we talked, and it was great fun. But it had nothing to do with the way the older guys made movies.
Yeah.
This was really.
And how did they relate to you differently?
A colleague, a collaborator.
Mm-hmm.
No, actually, interesting. The first meeting, Lucas had several pages, and he said he had worked it out. You open this with a half a page here, and then you go to a quarter of a page, and this is 2 pages. And then, what are you talking about? I can't. He had worked it all out mathematically.
Wow.
Before there was any script.
Wow.
And I said, "No, I can't do that." And Frank says, "That's okay.
Yeah.
He don't listen to him. You do it that way." But he was nice.
Yeah.
It was just that's the way he worked. It was like an equation.
Yeah.
And, but Francis was just the opposite. It was wonderful. It was a great experience. I loved that experience.
Let's go back a long way. There was a fascinating story about your childhood. Did your grandfather ever actually have any sort of effect on your life? Talk to you? What about your father?
My grandfather didn't know I was there, and he didn't know I was gone. So he never talked to me at all, ever. But years later, when my first play was on Broadway, A Hole in the Head, was about a father and his son, I got a call from my father saying if I didn't send him $5,000, he'd sue me. So I went to Florida. He was living in Miami, and had the confrontation and gave him the money and supported him for the rest of his life.
Wow.
And then, oddly enough, he got married again, and she had a long bout with cancer and was in the hospital. I paid those bills, and then I got a call years later. I meanwhile kept sending him money all the time, and he was in the hotel business now, so I was paying the rent in the hotels, and I took care of him. I got a call from this woman he's now living with that he's very sick and had a heart problem. So I went there and went to the hospital, and I go to see him, and he's got pneumonia and the heart condition, and he's soaking wet. And I went out to the nurse. I said, "What? He's soaking wet? He has pneumonia?" And they said, "We're not going in there. He's a mean son of a bitch. He throws food at us."
Wow.
And I went to the doctor. He said, "Get him out of here. We don't want him.
Wow.
He's going to die soon anyway. Let him die somewhere else." Wow. This is So I called Frank Sinatra, who we'd become good friends. And I said, "Frank, I can't get him into a hospital. And I can't get a doctor." He says, "Call me back in 20 minutes. He arranged for the best heart guy in in town, the best cardiology hospital, and wouldn't let me pay, but paid for everything. And my father got better, and he says to me, I'm rubbing his head and saying, I love you, you're going to be all right. I don't know where this came from. I don't. And he says, I want to stay when I get out of here. There's a place, a hotel. The owner's a good friend of mine. That's where I want an apartment. I said, okay, I'll take care of it. So I go to the hotel. The owner says, that son of a bitch, I don't want him in my building. Absolutely not.
Wow.
Everybody on the street hated him. He was a pain in the ass.
But he threatened to sue you, which was a joke. I mean, he couldn't sue you for using, for writing a play.
Well,
and then you supported him for the rest of his life after he'd abandoned you at the age of 10. Why did you do that?
I think he was my father. That's all. I don't have any rational explanation. I took care of him, and I finally found a place for him to stay. And this woman he was with says, I'll take care of him, but I need $400 a week in cash to take care of him. It's got to be cash or it'll interfere with my alimony payments. So I'm paying her $400 of cash. The other guy that I got wanted a year's rent in advance because I didn't want any trouble with him. So I'm going home. I was now living in Connecticut. And I'm thinking, what the hell am I going? How long? Where is this going to end? And by the time I got home, my wife said, got a call from the doctor and call him, and he dropped dead.
Wow.
So that was a perfect, happy ending.
Yeah. So one thing that we didn't talk about was how you came to Hollywood.
Well, I came to Hollywood with the Anna Magnani Wild as the Wind picture, and that was a great experience. I loved that experience. Then I didn't intend to write movies. I went back to New York, and I did a musical for Broadway with Mary Martin, who was the biggest in the world.
Sure.
And that was the biggest nightmare ever in the history of the world. The worst show. You can't imagine how bad it was. We were out of town, and she had I don't know what, she wouldn't talk. I said, this doesn't work. We got to fix it. We couldn't fix it. And then Arthur Schwartz and Howard Dietz did the score. I don't know anybody remember, but they did hundreds of great standards and musical disaster. Nobody was talking to each other. Schwartz, who was a lawyer, every morning he'd put a memo under the door saying he's going to sue us for if we close it, if we don't close it. She wouldn't talk to anybody. It was a catastrophe. So I said, movies are fun. Theater is terrible. I'm going to stick with movies. And that's what happened.
And you came back to Hollywood.
Yeah. Then after a while, then we did A Hole in the Head with Capra, and then I worked with Anthony Mann on Cimarron, which was another catastrophe. I mean, I could not get the script right. It was my fault. It was a huge epic about the Oklahoma Territory, and everybody lined up, and they shot a gun, and everybody rushed in to stake their claim and get the land. And as a writer, I'm writing this, I'm way out of my depth. I'm writing an epic, a Western, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. But I did a lot of research. And I had in this wagon, there's a woman wearing a red dress, and she's got a little boy, and he's got all these incredible, stupid details. And I go to this location, or wherever the hell it was, everything there's like 400 wagons and 2 bicycles, and she's wearing the red thing, and he's wearing. I didn't know you're going to really do this. It did it all exactly what I wrote. I thought, what the hell's going on here? But it didn't work as a movie.
What about The Night They Raided Minsky's?
That Norman Lear did it, and I wrote the script. We had a lot of fun writing it. Mostly I had fun looking up all the old vaudeville guys who were in burlesque.
Mm-hmm.
And I have in my file the original burlesque sketches that they actually used. Here come the judge, and suddenly I turned, and all these great, that was fun. And we shot the movie, and I left. And then Norma did some rewrites, and they did somebody else came in, and I wasn't there for the shooting of that at all. But I read the editor who cut the movie. He's the one that put in the old vintage stuff about the Lower East Side, and that's what made the movie what it is. I didn't write that, and so he made the movie.
And what about Wonton Ton, the dog?
Oh, jeez, I'm afraid to admit. Oh, my God. That is,
you got to talk to these IMDb people, Arnold. They're
oh, my God. That one will never go away. This is one that I had nothing. I had my name on it as all the ones I had my name on as producer were terrible movies that I had nothing to do with. David Picker, who the hell was producing? I wrote it on a plane.
Mm-hmm.
The whole thing. It was a joke. It was supposed to be a little joke about the dog, and he got the idea. We'll make every character in it an old-time comedian. I think that's what it was. Mm-hmm. Well, then there's no story. It's just nothing. And I wasn't invited to the set. I wasn't involved with it. I went to a screening of it, and I said, oh, my God, it's too late to take my name off of it. I would pay them to take my name off it.
Well, I guess the lesson for aspiring writers who might be seeing this is that that you shouldn't let setbacks deter you from your dreams, because even someone as successful as you with so many distinguished credits still had times when things just didn't go that well.
Oh, yeah. The only thing that I would say to a writer who is, if you can do anything else, do it. If you're driven, you're willing to go through all kinds of crap and take all kinds of blows in the head for 20 fine minutes, do it. If you have to do it, do it. Otherwise, forget about it. It's just too much.
Today, there are a lot of books out that tell us, how a screenplay is supposed to look and how to construct one. How much attention do you pay to that?
I don't pay any attention. I go, Robert Anderson, the 4 rules. That's it. I don't pay any attention to that. I think for young writers, this is what I would say. Learn your craft any way you can. If you learn it through a book, I learned it by watching films and watching films and watching films. But you better know your craft as well as you know how to drive, so you don't know how to think. You don't have to think when you do it. Mm-hmm. Because I discovered now, I did it then, but I didn't know I was doing it. Now I know when I'm doing it. If I'm writing from my head, it's terrible. I am a terrible writer. But my unconscious is a pretty good writer. And if you can somehow learn your craft so well that you don't have to think about it, and stop thinking and start letting it come from your unconscious and letting it go where it will go, if you know your craft, you're going to come up with a good screenplay. I think anybody can learn how to write a movie. That's easy. It's mathematical, and all the books tell you on page 25 you do this and do it. But once you've learned how to do it, then forget that you know how to do it and just write whatever comes out. And if you're not a real writer, nothing will come out. and you'll write, and you'll probably make more money than a writer who lets it come. I mean, right now, from what I see, it's all craft anyway. So it's just do it.
Do you work from a detailed outline when you're writing a screenplay?
No.
No.
What an adaptation, of course
Yeah.
I do. But right now, I will not write any more movies because I can't get a movie made. I'm writing a novel. I'm writing a play, and I have reached the point now where I know that for me, I equate it to going into orbit. You need enough thrust to get into orbit. So I'm out of my head. I'm not thinking here. And I don't have a routine. I don't get up and a certain time and work and quit this. I will, before I go to bed, I will say, here's where I am. This is the situation that I'm working on. Come up with something. And during the day, while I'm drinking tea or walking or looking at the paper, I'll get an idea and I just scribble a note on the thing. And I'll wait until when they get enough of them, I write in long. I've always written in longhand. And then my assistant types it. And it comes together. But I don't recommend it when you're just starting out.
Well, when you were writing screenplays,
Yeah.
did you did you outline before you did the screenplay?
No, I did on adaptations.
But not on originals?
No. Love with Proper Stranger wrote itself. Oh, wait a minute. As a matter of fact, now that I remember, I did the script, and then Pakula Mulligan came in, and they wanted a page one rewrite. They loved the idea. And I was in the Beverly Hills Hotel. Gee, this is fascinating to me. I forgot this. I'm in the Beverly Hills Hotel for several months. And at night, I would write the scene. And Bob and Alan would come over in the morning. They'd read the scene and say, okay. And the next night, I'd write another scene, and they'd come over in the morning. They would read it, and that's the way it was done. Wow. It just wrote itself. Traveling is everything to me. This is so weird. I don't care. I'm so weird. I have spent several months living with former cannibals in New Guinea. I've spent a couple of months in the Peruvian Amazon jungle with the headhunters in Borneo. I loved that. In India, I spent maybe 20 times in India, and I wrote a book about this holy man in 1971. Nobody ever heard of him. His name is Sai Baba. And I think last week or the week before, all the papers, even the LA Times, the BBC, huge article about him. He died, and he was worth $9 billion. Wow. And he has hundreds of millions of followers all over the world. Wow. And when I was there were like 50 people. So these things have happened to me. And in India, I went to Dharamsala, where the Dalai Lama is, to see him because I admire him so much. And he was so kind and just wonderful and laughed at everything. And then I saw him here in Beverly Hills again. But my primary focus has been when I was in my 20s. I read a book called Zen and the Art of Archery. And I said, this sounds fascinating. So I went to Kyoto to find out about it. This is a thing that's now that we're talking, I see that it's like going to Radio City. Whenever I find something I want to do, I just go.
Mm-hmm.
And I got involved with Zen, the practice of Zen, which is not a religion, it's a way of life. It's a way, and I've been doing it ever since. And my Zen master died a few years ago, and he was like the Pope of Zen in Japan. And I had a house in the south of France, and he would come to spend a month there. In Malibu, we would spend a month with me. He was very much like the Dalai Lama. He would laugh at everything. He would get serious, but he would see people screaming at each other because they had a fender bender. He would break him up. All the stupid things that we would do just made him laugh. And this, I really want to say this because it's so valuable, I think. I would always ask him questions about stuff. And he would say, "You'll never understand. It's too simple." And that's kind of it. We make a big deal about everything. It's just simple. Stop thinking so much. It's okay. Just laugh at it. Serious stuff, take care of it. But if you're on the path and you're kind and you're generous and you're noble and you don't hurt anybody, life will take care of itself. Don't worry it. Don't think it to death. It's too simple. I've never written directly about the travel in New Guinea and all the other places. That's for me. And that informs it indirectly by that's what I choose and that's what I think about life and that's how I run my life. But I've learned something from each of those places. While we're at it, if we're going to talk about it, in the Amazon jungle, I found this wonderful guide. It was just me. I always go alone. The guide and a guy with a machete to hack our way through it. And he was just a brilliant young man. And he would say, nobody can go into the jungle and come out the same person they are. It may change you. We don't know how, but you will look at everything different. And as we went, he would point out different things. He would say, look at that old piece of driftwood. And he would throw a little twig and it would move. It was a little caiman. Mm-hmm. Or he would say, look at the beautiful vine up there. And it was a snake. And they would say something that looked like a snake and it was the root of a tree. So everything was not what it seemed to be. But I remember this. I'm so glad you mentioned it, that we were in a hammock one night, and during the day the gnats are all over you, and you're sweating, and it's hot, and it's uncomfortable. And we came to the tributary, and he caught a fish. He was going to catch fish to eat. And I went for a swim because it was hot, and I in the water, and I came out and I felt better. And then he threw the rest of the fish that were going in the water. In 3 seconds, the piranha came and devoured it. Yeah. I said, what the hell did you let me go in there for? He said, they're not interested in you. You're not bleeding, you know. But that night in the hammock, and you hear these strange sounds, and I'm looking up at the sky. It was so clear, and the air was fresh. It smelled so sweet. And I remember saying, oh my God, I am so happy. I don't think I've ever felt that before. I was blissed out. So that's kind of what I get from the travel. It just makes me a person who's more interested in things and everything.